All right, let's look at Sajam's video. How to think about matchups.
Okay, so what I wanted to talk about with you guys today, chat room, I thought about this yesterday. This is just general FGC theory and general FGC matchup talk. So yesterday I was playing Them's Fighting Herds, right? And while playing the game, I was playing Oleander, right? I was fighting against a bunch of different characters, and then I fought against Velvet, right? So Oleander's like a mid-range character with good buttons, and she has a fireball. And Velvet is like the zoner character, right? So as the game was loading and I was thinking to myself, I'm going to fight against Velvet, in my brain I was like, okay, so my character is generally defensive or like in the mid-range kind of, but my opponent's character is like a dedicated zoner, right? So in this matchup, I will probably have to be the aggressor in this case. I'm going to have to be the one to force issues or like force situations and scrambles and get hits. And I realized when learning a fighting game.
Oh, it needs to be louder. I'm sorry, guys. All right. Let's try this again.
So what I wanted to talk about
is this better?
Today, chat room. I thought about this yesterday. This is just general FGC theory and general FGC matchup talk. So yesterday I was playing.
Oh, I hate it when people ruin their haircut, dude.
I was playing Oleander, right? I was fighting against a bunch of different characters.
Honestly, you guys didn't miss
Velvet, right? So Oleander's like a mid-range character with good buttons, and she has a fireball. And Velvet is like the zoner character, right? So as the game was loading, and I was thinking to myself, I'm gonna fight against Velvet. In my brain, I was like, okay. So my character is generally defensive or like in the mid-range kind of, but my opponent's character is like a dedicated zoner, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in this matchup, I will probably have to be the aggressor in this case. I'm going to have to be the one to force issues or like force situations and scrambles and get hits. And I realized when learning a fighting game, any fighting game, when going into a matchup, those are the kinds of things that should be in your head when you're learning. So when the match is loading up, regardless of what character it is, you should be doing like a checklist in your mind and saying, okay, who is the aggressor and who is the defensive player, right?
So this is kind of like, I get this way of thinking. And we kind of talk about this before on stream, but we kind of approach it a slightly different way in the sense that we kind of look at how a character plays neutral at different ranges. And that kind of fits into what he's talking about, right? So you have the long range, the mid range, and the close range. And usually, YIT official, thanks for following, man. Appreciate the support. Hope you enjoy the stream and learn a thing or two about a thing or two. So if you are, if your strong suit is at a closer range than your opponent prefers to play, you're often the aggressor. So if you're a close range player, you're always going to be the aggressor. If you're a long range player, you're never going to be the aggressor. So that's kind of like the generic way to look at it. I'm kind of the person that I know what I want and how I want it, and like it's perfect. And when I don't do that, I will never give them my money again. I get that. I'm like unsurprisingly very sensitive about my hair as well. So I only go to like a select few hairdressers that I know are good, even though it's more expensive. It's just worth it to me.
Who has to take more risks? And sometimes the answer is very simple. If you're playing Zangief against Dulcim, you're like, well, I'm the aggressor. I got to get in, and this guy, he's going to be running. But if you're playing a matchup where the answer is not easy to figure out, or you have to like really think about it, like, am I the aggressor? Am I not the aggressor? Like, who has to approach here? Do neither of us fit nicely in that category? Are we both zoning characters? Or you could be playing two aggressive characters where one character has strong ways to keep out the other character, even though they're generally an aggressive character.
Yeah, so this is another thing, right? What he does not take into account either is that just in terms of that, this is what usually happens. It doesn't need to happen. Yeah, so I definitely agree with that. So approaching is never or almost never like a necessity. In a lot of situations, you can kind of just block it out and just trade evenly and let the clock do the work. It kind of depends on a lot of factors. So like, say I'm playing like Lucina versus Snake. So Snake, generally seen as like a long range character, can use his grenades, Nikita, whatever, to set up his long range. If I have a significant lead as Lucina, I don't have to approach still. I don't have to aggress. Because the alternative win condition of, the clock running out forces the opponent to aggress regardless of how our kits match up against each other. But one thing he points out is that it becomes really hard when you both play the same range. Because when you both play the same range, the one who aggresses kind of comes down to, it's a lot more footsies based. Not on long range, obviously. On long range, I would say it's a lot more trap based. So who can trap the opponent into shitty situations better. So for example, Alomar is an amazing keep away character, in the sense that he can run away and throw Pikmin at you. But he doesn't really force you into shitty situations the way that Snake can, or Duck Hunt can, characters like that. Sam is another example, very good at running away, keeping you out, but not as great at putting you in a shitty situation. So they're bad at zoning versus zoning because they don't pressure you at the long range. They just force you to go into a closer range. And when you're not willing to go into a closer range, then the long range doesn't matter. So I think a lot of what he's talking about so far, and we're only a little bit into the video, of course, doesn't really keep in mind the timer, in Smash at least. I know in Street Fighter is a little bit different in traditional fighting games because the stage is smaller, mobility is more limited. But I think even then, a lot of like these core principles apply. Is like, you don't need to force an approach, even if you're getting, pressured from the long range.
You have to think about it, right? Even if you don't know the matchup super in depth, that's one of the ways you can start to form thoughts about how you're supposed to play the matchup. The next thing you want to think to yourself, what specific tools do I have to look for? Like, what is my opponent's win condition? Is there a specific range that they want to always be in? Is there a specific tool or thing that they want to land? How does my opponent win? And if you don't know the answer to that question, because you might not know, you might be like me learning a new game, you fight your opponent's character and you see what they do to win. Are they hitting you once and knocking you down and setting up strong offense? Are they trying to run away and just hit you with a projectile?
Okay, so I don't 100% agree with this because I feel like the best way to kind of approach this part of the matchup is to... Okay, so of course you're looking at what your opponent is doing, right? But I think a better way to approach a new matchup when trying to win, so this is purely like, say you're in a tournament setting, right? Is you go for your own game plan. You try to, do what is optimal for your character. And then you figure out why your optimal choices aren't working. Because say that you like your best neutral tool is oftentimes your best neutral tool because there are very limited ways to kind of play that tool, right? And that in turn makes it easier to figure out why it's not working because there's only a few ways that it's realistically going to lose. And from there, you can try to figure out, okay, so why do the qualities of my opponents force me to adjust my game plan? And then based on that information, you can adjust your game plan. So looking only at your opponents, I get it because you're figuring out what is best for them. But if your strongest option already kind of naturally counterplays their character, then you can kind of skip that step in its entirety. And then you figure out, okay, so why does my standard plan not work? And then you adjust based on that information, and then you figure out, okay, so how do they deal with that? And then you just kind of build the Yomi layers over the neutral from there.
Chip you down. Are they trying to stay in the middle of the screen because they have like a sweet spot where they have really strong ways to reach and hit you, etc., right? Like, those are important things to figure out in the matchup.
So rather than win condition, I would say, okay, so one thing that I tell a lot of people that is like the best wisdom is when you study your opponent's movement, you will figure out their intentions. So when someone I'll get to your question a little bit, Warpstar. So, so if someone is running away from you, then that is the range they want to be in. If someone is approaching you, then that is the range they want to be in, right? So you can always just kind of look for the position they are trying to achieve and play based on that. Which is less risky. Just going for your game plan might be risky to force. Yeah, so there could be, say that you're playing, a relatively poor character, then I would say forcing your game plan might not be the best option. But most better characters are good because their game plan has very specific counterplay. And in that scenario, I would definitely recommend just going for your optimal choices. Because your game plan for game 1 is going to be low risk anyway, because you don't know what your opponent is going to do. Even if you know the matchup, you don't know their playstyle. So you will still go for a game plan that's relatively low risk. Playing a more... learning a matchup, mostly. Learn how to think about matchups. I would say for this stream, we often look at Smash in particular. So Smash, learning matchups in Smash, right? You could so use your top privilege if you have it. Yeah, so what you could do is play an entirely reactive game where you play very passively, don't establish your character, like, you don't establish your will, you purely look at what your opponent wants to do. Which I would say is a legitimate way to approach a matchup if you have a poor neutral in general. But if you do that, that's going to take a lot of effort. Because when you do play a purely observational game and you're not aware of what the matchup is, you're going to have to spend a lot of energy learning, what's going on and how to specifically counterplay it. Whereas if you establish your will from the get-go, yes, you're going to lose out on some interactions, which, you can patch up, but you're also going to win on some interactions, generally speaking. Which means there's less information to take in at once, and that's also going to make it a little bit easier for you in general.
Are there natural reactions when you stand in certain places? If you stand half a screen away, what are they doing, or what are they looking for? Are they uncomfortable? Are they running? Are they trying to get out of that distance? If you're a quarter screen away, right, even closer, how does your opponent react? Do they become the aggressor in that situation? Do they have good tools to hit you there? Do they have to flee because they have nothing that's safe or strong in that area?
No, you should, definitely, my point is you should do the same. You should do both at the same time. So apply your game plan, and because it's such a solid game plan, there's only very limited ways that I can lose, and then based on those observations, you can adjust. That is my opinion, though.
You know what I mean? Thinking about these options as you play is very important. It's how you...
But that is assuming that you don't know the matchup. So if you do know the matchup, I would recommend observing first, because you want to see what the opponent's tendencies are. And you had your game plan figured out already, right? So it's not like it's a huge stream of information if you had your game plan figured out beforehand already. If it's a new matchup, it's a lot more information, though. Okay.
Figure out what your opponent's character wants to do, even without having knowledge of specifics. Just thinking I think this range seems uncomfortable. They're always running when I'm there, so I should probably try to put myself in that range. This is the kind of stuff you can learn and ask yourself while fighting against someone else. You don't have to do specific research to understand this stuff. You can just fight against the character and be like, well, he doesn't like standing right there, so I can just assume that. The thing you ask yourself past that is, are there specific tools in this matchup that I need to use more often? Do I have a tool that my opponent will really struggle to deal with? Like throwing out Cami Drill from full screen against Manat might be a tool that maybe you don't want to do that much. You don't want to just throw out Spiral Arrow all the time against characters, but against Manat, it's very good. Why? Because her punishes are very weak for it or non-existent, depending on the spacing. And it gets you in. Perhaps that's not a move you want to use against Zangief, right? Because doing Raw Drill against Zangief means you get murdered. But doing Raw Drill against Manat is very good because the matchup's different. In one matchup, you're the aggressor, and the other match, you're not. Yeah, DPing in neutral as Grand against Fairy is a great example. Mashing Sweep in neutral against Dhalsim or any kind of zoning character is probably going to be okay for you, right?
Yeah, so this is kind of what we're talking about, right? So you want to establish your game plan, and the things he kind of talks about is reacting to what the opponent is doing and establishing your options based on that, which is a good way, once again, a good way to approach it. But if you look at things like Spiral Arrow in neutral, very, very unconventional. So you would need decent knowledge, not just of the situations at hand, but also of the matchup by itself to kind of pull something like that out. So I don't think that's a great example, but I get what he's getting at.
right? Because they won't have strong punishes if your sweep misses, and if it hits, you might win the round. And when thinking about the way matchups break down and archetypes and stuff like this, I realized, again, this keeps happening to me, I realized that it reminded me of card games. And in card games, when the match starts, you often look at your opponent's deck and you think, is my opponent's deck fast? Is it slow? Is it mid-range? How does it play? What are they looking for? What are the things that I have to watch out for in this matchup, etc., right? So what I thought about was this really cool handy dandy graph. So if you guys follow card games at all, you might be familiar with Swim. He creates a bunch of cool content. In fact, he's streaming live on Twitch right now. And this chart has combo, aggro, control, mid-range, tempo value. This is explaining what different archetypes are good against once and what their goal is. You know, this reminds me a lot of thinking about fighting game characters. Except instead of putting aggro, control, and combo, you can just put like rushdown, zoning, and grappler. And you can put mid-range character where...
Okay, so I don't think grapplers in Smash are their own thing. So maybe this is like a thing in fighting games. Like honestly, I've only really played team fighters and anime fighters, so I'm not really too familiar with like the Street Fighter triangle. But even if you would say like zoners, mid-range spacers, close-range punish game characters, I don't think there's like a set rock, paper, scissors in terms of archetypes in Smash.
Where mid-range character is. And mid-range...
I mean, yeah, we have Incineroar and DK, who are like kind of grapplers, but for the most part, they kind of fit the same strategy as most close-range punish game characters. So Mario, Ryu, Peach, like, while they don't get their hits through grabs, they still, you know, play a very similar game plan in that they also just kind of want to get close and then just they win in the close range.
Range characters stand.
They're also not really archetypes. They're also simply things you can do. That's very true as well. So it's not always an archetype. Sometimes it's just like a strategy more than anything. But I will say that most characters have a preferred strategy. In the same sense that we kind of can categorize characters as like primarily long range characters, primarily mid range characters, primarily close range characters.
In between rushdown and zoners, and their objective changes depending on the matchup, right? They're flexible characters. A mid-range character's goal against a rushdown character is to play slow and survive, right? Yeah. You don't want to slug it out with this character. You want to play slow. If I'm fighting a zoner, if Ryu's fighting Dalsum, he is now the aggressor. He's a mid-range character that now has to approach because he's fighting against a character that is more defensive. So that's a character who is malleable, right? They play slow against fast characters. They play fast against slow characters. Tempo and value are card game terms. When you're creating tempo, you're generally putting stuff...
We're looking at this video by Sajam about how to think about matchups. And I'm just kind of sharing my thoughts. And then afterwards, we're just going to get into viewer battles.
Stuff on the board that requires an answer. Your opponent has to do stuff to answer it, right? They can't just sit there and wait. Value is accrued by doing...
Yeah.
Like, you're playing them and they're winning you.
Like, you're kind of... He's comparing things that are, in my opinion, not really comparable either.
Something that's more long-term, right? You know, if you play a card that draws more cards, right? That is value, but it's not creating tempo. Like building meter from full screen or something, right? By doing special move. That is value you're creating, but that's not doing anything on the screen to threaten your opponent. Anyway, tempo and value are more complex. Even in card games are more complex than...
I can get that though. So something like Young Link pulling a bomb, you know, you would get value out of that, but you're not pressuring your opponent. So I can see that comparison, right? But so I would sooner than tempo and value, I would just say like resources and pressure, something like that, right? And all of the characters, like all of the archetypes, if you look at like long range, mid range, close range, whatever, all of them can put on pressure. But then all of them have like resources in the same way that you have them in fighting games. And even in most fighting games, there's not always a way to improve your current resource. So in Street Fighter, you cannot like key charge in a way similar to how you can in Dragon Ball Fighters. Well, in card games, like value is always a thing in card games.
Anything else? It's an example. It's just a general thought.
Yeah. Right.
Out there about archetypes. In fact, in a lot of archetypes, control might lose the aggro, right?
Yeah.
It might just be the opposite. Like in some games, zoners might always beat rushdown characters or whatever, right? This is an extremely vague example, right? It's never absolute. Zoners could lose to grapplers, right? Depending on the kind of grappler and depending on the zoner. Or a zoner could crush a grappler depending on the type of grappler and the type of zoner, right? It depends on your tools. But in general, charts like this and the archetype ideas that I'm bringing up are created to help you think, where does my character fall in line with this other opponent's character?
Yeah.
Can I do examples from SF5 matchups? Yeah. Let's use Cammy, Dhalsim.
Yeah, let's have the examples.
Match goes, the worse it is generally for Cammy. She needs to end the match to get in. In Zangief versus Cammy, Ryu has to approach. He is now the aggressive character. He cannot afford to sit there like a mid-range character, right? She can play fast. And Vasaraga would be more under the grappler, like automatic, right? Some rushdown characters don't have the tool rushdown like automatic, right? Some grapplers are very good on defense if you try to get in on them. So rushdown characters struggle against them a lot because generally rushdown characters don't have the tools to play a slow kind of defensive mid-range game, right? Generally, right? Like Street Fighter 4, the grapplers are so strong on defense. They're terrifying on defense because they have invincible backdash. They have extremely fast SPD. They have ultras that you can't jump post flash.
Yeah, so I get his point. It's like these systems are general. So in the same way that when I say you have long range, mid range, and close range characters, that's like a general system. That's not, it shouldn't be treated as gospel. Like Palutena is not just a mid-range character. She has a lot of long-range qualities. I would say like the most dedicated mid-range character is like Shulk. But then there's Xerxes Samus, who kind of beats Shulk at the mid-range. But then in close... But Xerxes Samus is not even a dedicated mid-range character, right? She also has a lot of qualities of a close-range fighter. Ryu is close-range, but some players don't even play him like that. Like, you can play a mid-range playstyle with Ryu, if you're Yuffie. So yeah, I would definitely agree. I think there's, I think having systems like this, so this is something that I always kind of talk about, is that there's always a balance between, abstracting information to make it more applicable to other situations, and specifically looking at what's in front of you. And the more you abstract information and turn it into concepts and charts and whatever, the easier it is to apply to different situations, but the more nuance is lost, because as you try to fit everything into your system, you're going to have to stretch your different definitions to make sure that everything actually has a place. On the other hand, looking at everything like in its raw form, it can be very hard to keep track of what is actually happening if you do that. Because there's just so many factors that go into like a fighting game, Smash specifically, because more movement options, platforms, offstage, just DI as well. So there's a lot of factors that go into a fighting game, and it becomes really hard to see a situation exactly for what it is. That's why we figure out what these like ways to abstract the games are. But you do lose nuance, and that's very important to keep in mind. Yeah, ranges are very fluid between matchups, and definitely abstract in general. Like, especially in Ultimate with such a high input delay, burst range becomes extremely huge compared to like other Smash games, right? So mid-range in turn becomes a more important range to play at. And that's just that aspect is because of reaction time. So that's just like one of those factors you don't even really consider, but it's in there, and it kind of ripples through the entirety of the matchup. Like, all of the things you do in the matchup are affected by the fact that your mid-range is larger due to input delay. And just like that, there's like all of these little variables that all play such a huge role in
50%. Like, you don't want to pressure them.
Creating concepts.
In an anime game, right, for instance, like, a lot of the times the grappler characters just get destroyed on defense. You just rush them down, you do instant overheads, they're just stuck. This kind of chart or this kind of line of thinking, it's like a guideline. It's a way to get your brain thinking about the matchup. These general thoughts are thoughts that you can use to build on your matchup knowledge. The example I keep using is me learning Oleander, who is a mid-range character, and fighting against Velvet, right? So as a mid-range character, I was playing slow against almost every character that I fought. I'm fighting Tien, which is like Magneto. I'm fighting Arizona, who's trying to dash up and pressure and you know, has all this armored moves and stuff. And then I fight Velvet. Velvet's a character who's a dedicated zoner. I now have to approach. The way I played the matchup and the tools I used changed, right? In other matchups, like for instance, my TK Fireball was really good to keep people out. Now it became not as strong of a tool, so I have to use different options. Yeah, I started using teleport more aggressively because it was a way that I could try to get around the zoning. That's why also when people come in and they say, hey Sajam, what do you think about X or Y example or B or C example, or how do you fight against this character or that character? The point of me bringing this up is not so that I can tell you how every matchup archetype breaks down, but the point of this is to get you to understand that you should be thinking about these things when learning fighting games. And not just learning fighting games, watching fighting games as well.
Okay, so let's kind of go back into my example and why I think it's a better example. So if we have this stage here, right? And here we have, like, whoever, it's Palutena. So if you look at her ranges, so say that this is like the long range, and then this is the mid range, and this is the close range, right? The thing about these ranges is that if you do nothing, yeah, that's Palu, definitely Palu, you can see by the hair. This entire stage is long range. So if you want to be in the mid range, then it's up to you to enter that range. So that is kind of a better way to look at the characters. Thanks, dude. I mean, I've been doing this for a few months now. I'm really trying to up my illustration game. I mean, as you can see, it's working out. So if it was up to her, she could just stay in her long range and win from there because her long range is better than yours. So separating characters by range rather than archetype is, in my opinion, a lot better because it shows you what you want to do. What's up, Raf? So in this scenario, like if she wants to be in the long range, even if you make it into the mid range, you're still covered by her long range. So even though it is a better situation for you, she can still play her long range game, right? There's no reason for her to kind of adjust to you if she wants to play her long range tools. That's just my opinion, though.
As well, you should think to yourself, which character is the aggressor? Does this character being the aggressor mean they have to?
So in that sense, like that's also why I think aggressor is not like the right option, like the right word, because I think aggression is very, like straight up aggression is very rare. So if we go back to the stage with Palutena, she's sitting in the stage. I'll contest you. I'm gonna get drunk. Have fun, man. Have fun. So this is Palutena. Now you know for sure. What were we talking about? I kind of forgot my train of thought because of Moripo. Damn it. Yeah, so aggression. So you never try to approach. Thank you, Birding. Aggressor. Yeah. So you never approach someone by literally directly running at them. Because if you do that, then you're basically just opening yourself up to get, like, for one, you're committing to your dash and your opponent's not committing at all. So your options are already more limited. And then you're entering a burst range in which they can just react to you and kind of play from there. So something that you should do when you're approaching someone is, if we have like the long range like all the way over there and the mid range starts here, you literally just enter the mid range and you play from here. And you know she doesn't want you to be in the close range. So what she's probably going to do, she's going to dash back and put you back into the long range. So then you dash forward and you stay in the mid range. And eventually you can play from here in a situation in which you're both not committed. You're both, you both have access to your mid range tools. And then as a reward, like this is why close range characters are so good, because their reward can be, I enter the close range, and from there I can play a good game. Like a better game than she can. Which kind of turns a range, which is normally very random. Like close range, it's very hard to say who wins close range because everything is unreactable. Anything could hit you. Lots of ways that range can, play out. Meanwhile, mid-range is more about reaction, baiting your opponent out, playing footsies, playing with stage control as well, because dashback is such a strong tool as well. But yeah, if you were to directly approach her all the way into the close range, then the entire mid range would be a situation in which she can hit you, but because you're committed to the close range, you cannot hit her yet. So by just entering the close range instead, just kind of, you know, and ending your approach in the mid range, you're playing that bait and punish game, and then from there you're gonna get a lot more of a consistent result in your game plan. Simply because you're playing like a more controlled rock paper scissors, where, you know, you could dash out of their burst range, you could jump over their burst range and then go back down, stuff like that. A lot more options than simply committing to being in close range. So aggression as a term, I don't like it. I think, you know, talking about ranges and which range everyone wants to be in, definitely a more like complete view of the game.
To take more risks, or because they're the aggressor and their tools are so strong against the defensive character, do they not even have to worry about taking risks? Do they just run the other character over, and the defensive character has to take risks to stop them from getting in? In some matchups, the aggressor is so strong at getting in that the defensive player is forced to constantly make...
Yo, thanks for the follow, Banana O Leaf. Appreciate it so very much. Hope you enjoy the stream and learn a thing or two about a thing or two.
You know, low impact or weak decisions just to try to survive before they get in. Manat is fighting some rushdown character who gets in really easy against her. She's jump back jabbing. She's, you know, scared to throw her orb. She's like constantly fishing with like big buttons to try to keep them out because she's scared they're going to get in, and then she ends up giving up a lot of space because of it. Or archetype.
Yeah, so this is another thing, like talking about space specifically, right? So we have this character who's like a mid-range zoner. She's trying to control the mid-range, and because the opponent is not committing to, you know, entering the close range, her moves can be capitalized on. So if you were to approach her and try to get like into the close range, yeah, you cannot have space in your name. I know I fixed it with an underscore, but you know, to each their own, to each their own. So if you were to commit to trying to get into the close range, you would have simply gotten boxed out. But by entering the mid range instead, just staying at the, you know, the edge of her range, she's gonna miss a move or hit your block, B- in terms of frames, and then your reward is that you get closer. So that's kind of like the game that a close range character plays, is they try to, you know, first they go from long range to mid range, and then from mid range to close range, and then play from there. You never go straight to close range. It's just almost never worth the risk. Almost never.
Type is Ed. What archetype do you think Ed is? How would you describe? I mean, I'm assuming Ed is your character, right? How would you? What are his strengths? What does he do? Rushdown, but not a very good one. I mean, that's character strength, right? That doesn't have to do with what he's trying to do. You classify Ed as a rushdown character. Are there matchups where Ed is the defender, though? Probably, right? There are matchups where he can use his fireballs and anti-airs to play defensively. He can play both. He can play slow or he can play fast. You see what I'm saying? G is rushdown with extra steps. Dude, have you ever watched G versus Zangief? That character is not playing aggressive. G's goal is to get a level and never let Zangief near him. He has a fireball that is very strong.
Yeah, so a lot of Street Fighter.
Zangief. Think, oh, the zoning character must play defensive, so I can just sit at full screen and do something else. The zoner can start putting pressure on you if you don't have an answer for their zoning. If Guile's a defensive character, right? He's a zoner. But if you're letting him throw light boom and walk up to you, you're letting him be the aggressor in those situations.
Yeah, so this is another thing. So this is like, okay, so I don't really talk about this because I'm still kind of developing the whole system in my head. But I think within every range, there's different archetypes. So in long range, I think there's long range like pure zoners, but there's also long range trappers. And what he's talking about is like a trapper. So not like we talked about with Olimar a little bit ago. Olimar is good at keep away, but he's not good at, you know, forcing a shitty situation on you. And that's kind of what he's talking about. So if you play against a long range character and you let them set up a good situation, like they have trapper qualities, you know, then you're obviously not playing it well. So that's kind of like the counter argument to the thing we talked about at the beginning. Is like these are also strategies. So like zoning, mid range, you know, aggression can also be a strategy, more so than like a character archetype. And you don't always have to aggress on a zoner. Even if you don't have an answer to their zoning, you cannot hit them back. You can always just kind of mitigate their zoning and play from there. But against a trapper, that's a lot harder because trappers can set up a situation in which they can pressure you from a long range.
Right? If you're not putting enough pressure on him to be afraid, then he can play aggressive against you. And if a rushdown character gets the life lead, they can force a zoner to come to them.
Yeah.
It's the same idea. You don't have to be, it's not like one or the other, right? These things change mid-match. Yeah, zoning is more than just projectiles. Zoning can be how you move from your opponent, the position you put yourself, the normals you use. How would I apply this to Tekken? The exact same way. What do the characters want to do? The point of this discussion, right, thinking about what is my character trying to do, what is my opponent's character trying to do, is to figure out what your opponent wants to do to win. What are they doing to win? What are their goals? What are their strong tools? What are their weak tools? What should you...
So basically, you know, study their game plan. I think for Pikachu, so Pikachu specifically, Pikachu actually has a trapper move. Like her Thunder Jolt is, or his Thunder Jolt, is a trapper move. Like you start it up at the long range, and then you follow it, and if they, you know, if they hadn't intercepted it, now they're in a shitty situation. It's kind of like an extreme case of a trapper move is like Robin's Arcfire. If you don't intercept it, now you're in a shitty situation. And a lot of what Pikachu does is the same. It's like he enters the mid-range, and then he plays from there. So look at Isam. Okay, well, don't look at that. Don't look at that. That's just him getting called out. But what he did at the beginning of the game is he entered. He didn't rush into close range. He waited until he was at like a safe mid-range and tried to play from there. He just got called out on his defensiveness. So he's out of the long range now. This is where he can start threatening his moves. And you know, Leo kind of capitalized on this by, you know, going for super aggressive, super hard callouts. But in general, this is not rush down. This is not aggression in the sense that, you know, Sajam was talking about. Of course, these are just punishes. And then when you do get in close range, so he made the close range happen, and now he's at the strongest, so he gets a full punish. So of course in Smash, you don't have a lot of like raw neutral resets. A lot of the states flow into each other. But now we're back in neutral. So how does Isam approach? You know, he zone breaks with the up B. But before that, if we look at this situation, he doesn't rush his opponent down. So this is the long range. He kind of just waits at the long range. He doesn't even run. He just kind of walks forward. Cosmos camps. Yeah, so that's another way to play it. You know, capitalize on the trapper aspect of Pikachu. And he just kind of, you know, even when he saw MKLeo approach, he just retreats himself. Like he actually retreated at the mid-range. See? Immediate retreat. Yo, Imperial ZX, what's up? Thanks for the follow, man. Hope you enjoyed the stream and learn a thing or two about a thing or two. So yeah, so that's like a very important nuance is how do you get into the close range? And oftentimes that is through the mid range. And then when he is in the close range, he just uses his like dominant tool, which is back air. And look at how defensively he plays. And the one time he does approach it directly, he loses. Look at all his movement. This is not aggressive movement. And then when he does directly approach, he gets punished for it. Need I say more? So yeah, that's my take on that video. Let's get into viewer battles, guys.